The royal guard jumped into Camilla's helicopter and ruined her plan to get away. She didn't wait for permission, didn't file a manifest, and didn't even bring all of her security guards. She got on a helicopter with a retired pilot and went to a place that no one was supposed to know about. But Camilla didn't expect the Coldstream guard to read the flight order, see the false clearance, and catch the escape plan mid-air. He didn't ask for help. He didn't yell. He went toward the rotors and leaped. Before we continue this amazing story, don't forget to leave a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from, and hit the subscribe button with the bell icon turned on. Then we'll tell you where she was heading and what she was attempting to get away from. Because today wasn't about grounding a plane, it was about a guard who wouldn't let the crown be taken away without the king's permission. The top helipad terrace at Windsor was so cold that it went right through the wool of their uniforms. Before dawn, rain came in, thin, silver, and steady, making the limestone flagstones slippery under Sergeant Darian Wolfe's boots. Under the amber perimeter lights, all 4 of the rotor pads were empty. The mist curled low, making the east wing of the castle look like a shadow. Wolfe stood with his hands behind his back, and his body straight yet relaxed, just below the edge of the terrace canopy. Nothing was going to happen to him. There was no record. Nothing was cleared. Another frigid morning in a post that didn't move much before 0700. He looked at the flight control display that was built into the wall panel next to him. It was still empty. No planes are coming in. No planes are scheduled to leave. When a crewman came up to him, wearing a high-vis vest that was saturated across the shoulders and carrying a small flight deck tablet, Wolfe turned to face him with the calm preparedness of a soldier who didn't enjoy surprises. Wolfe asked, "Which pad?" The man frowned and said, "Pad C. They just called in. They said to get it ready for VIP lift right away." "Who are they?" "Just a call sign and an operations push. No name. They told us to fuel for 40 minutes at full rotor, but there was nothing royal stamped. That usually means Windsor regional transfer," Wolfe said with a frown. "There's nothing planned for today." The crewman shrugged his shoulders. "Not my lane, mate. Just told to get it ready." He walked over to the fuel hatch. Wolfe went into the terrace control booth and accessed the household aviation ledger. Security protocols logged every movement of the plane, every clearance on the ground, and every assignment of a pad, with a timestamp and 2 signatures. Pad C was marked as inactive till Monday. No overrides, no temporary bookings, and no attached pilot credentials. This time he switched systems to the maintenance panel and looked at the telemetry from incoming planes. A plane just sent a handshake to the system. The tail code is XR221. Make the EC-145 helicopter. Crown Internal Fleet Registry. Windsor Hangar 2 is where you are right now. Status spooling. Wolfe looked at the television. That plane was part of the older Crown Support Fleet. It wasn't assigned to the Queen Consort. It wasn't on rotation for public engagement, and it wasn't allowed to leave with a VIP without submitting a full manifest. He went back onto the wet flagstones and looked around the terrace. Someone had given the order for a helicopter to take off, even though it didn't exist on paper. And now the wet tarmac was being utilized for something that no one had cleaned up. He tapped the connection for communications. "Hello, Windsor Flight Control. This is Sergeant Wolfe at Pad C. What's going on with aircraft XR221? "A break. That's not on today's deployment list, Sergeant. Should we?" Wolfe didn't answer right away. He turned to look at the distant hangar, where the sound of spooling rotors started to cut through the morning fog. The air didn't feel calm anymore. Wolfe strolled over the paved hallway that connected the upper pad to the internal annex of Hangar 2 with a quiet sense of purpose. The rain hit his shoulders in a constant beat, but he didn't move. His suit was already wet, and the brim of his cap was leaking. It wasn't comfort that mattered today, it was protocol. He pushed through the door and headed straight for the wall-mounted flight log terminal. It was empty, with only a single screen buzzing in the corner and dull light bouncing off polished steel. He quickly swiped his clearance band to see what was going on with the rotor on Pad C. There it was again, XR221, which was supposed to leave at 0645 for a temporary estate pad in the Chiltern Hills. There was no return logged, no co-pilot listed, and Captain Rowan Firth was in charge of the flight. Wolfe's forehead fell. That couldn't be true. Firth had retired the year before after having a heart problem during exercising. He didn't do anything. He wasn't given the go-ahead, and he definitely didn't get reactivated without getting a new medical certification. Wolfe got to the personnel job role. Rowan Firth has officially retired. Status is not active. No clearances. His heart rate sped up. He opened the folder for this flight's clearance. There was only one file uploaded, and it wasn't an official order. It was a photocopy with low resolution, no watermark, and no countersignature. It was a fake manifest, if he had ever seen one. The reason for leaving was only private consort logistics movement. No escort, no flight code, no registry stamp, and no cargo list are needed. Wolf got in touch with Windsor Aviation Control. "This is Sergeant Wolf. Please confirm the pilot's signature for the EC-145 taking off from Pad C. Let me check. One moment." There was a pause. "No pilot signed in for that bird today. No manifest, no clearance. It's not on the Royal Escort list either. That chopper should stay on the ground." Wolf let out a long breath. "Got it." He ended the line to look, still staring at the flickering screen. This wasn't a mistake on the form. It was made up. Someone had put in an unplanned departure, without anyone noticing, with a grounded pilot's name, no reported cargo, and no operational control. And someone thought that the guard on duty would be too weary, too busy, or too polite to ask about it. But Sergeant Darian Wolf hadn't been taught to step aside. He learned how to find things that didn't belong, and this flight didn't belong to the Crown. Someone was trying to get away from it. The sound of tires coming closer resonated strangely across the deck, not like the regular Royal Motor Pool, which is excessively smooth and regulated. Wolf turned his head just as a matte black SUV with no royal insignia came up the entry ramp. There were no license plates, only rain running down the hood, and tinted windows that didn't show any passengers. It came to a complete stop right next to Pad C. The driver got out looking strange and not wearing a uniform. He didn't say when he got there, he just opened the back door and stayed still. A beat later, Queen Camilla came out. She had a storm cloak pulled up high around her shoulders and the hood up. She didn't have a crown, a brooch, a public escort, or even her regular press secretary. Instead, she had two assistants behind her, one carrying a slim overnight bag, and the other carrying a long, reinforced document box with brass corners and a diplomatic lock plate. Wolf kept an eye on what she did. She didn't look around or talk to anyone. She moved like someone who has practiced a step a dozen times. "Keep the rotors hot," she said to the pilot, who was already at the bottom of the stairs to the helipad. He nodded quickly, too quickly, and then turned back to the plane. Wolf's eyes got smaller. There was no RAF insignia or aviation rank on that royal flight jacket, just a blank fly patch and a call sign embroidered in faded thread that said F. He stepped forward, not blocking or posing, just being there. "Ma'am," Wolf answered calmly. "Can I check your manifest?" Camilla kept walking. "Everything's been cleared ahead of time. Files have been sent." With a smile, the man next to the helicopter stepped in front of Wolf, trying to wave him off. "Consort discretion clearance," he remarked in a calm voice. "Nothing to log. This is a transfer of goodwill within the company. No escort needed." Wolf didn't move. "That's not how we do things for Pad C departures. I need to check." The pilot's smile dimmed a little. "We've taken care of everything through the consort's private office. We're all set." Wolf didn't blink an eye. "Then show the clearance." No one answered. The helper with the overnight bag climbed the stairs. The other person waited for Camilla while she climbed the ramp. The rotors started to spin faster, cutting through the rain and sending it flying off the stone in wide, shining arcs. Wolf stepped back and tapped the communications mic that was connected to his collar. "Sergeant Wolf here. Pad C is active with an unscheduled consort departure. I need protocol verification right now. No manifest, no signed pilot, no clearance trail. Confirm or deny." There was a flash of static. "Stand by." Camilla was almost there. The helicopter, which was now fully lighted, started to make that unmistakable high-pitched whine that comes immediately before it took off. Wolf's boots didn't move on the stone below. If this was a departure, it was the quietest one ever made by someone who was born into a throne. He wasn't going to let it happen without someone being held accountable. "Winds ops to Pad C," the voice said through Wolf's headset. "We have a problem with routing." Wolf walked behind the stair truck, which protected him from the rotor's growing wind. "Go ahead. That chopper isn't on the list of international departures. It's a domestic flight with a short-range route filed for 25 minutes. The destination is a private LZ, and it's not registered." Wolf's forehead creased. "Where?" "Coordinates drop in the Chiltern Hills. The estate is owned by a holding company called North Redcliffe Trust." Wolf's eyes got sharper. He recognized that name. Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's son, was in charge of the trust. The same estate was utilized for private tastings and meetings that weren't on the books. The identical piece of land that was detected in a custodial audit last spring was ignored because it wasn't used by the royal family. He talked slowly and softly. "Are there any official papers that go with this transfer?" "Negative, and nothing is logged under custodial or legacy logistics. We're running a blank trail, and Sergeant, go ahead. That helipad isn't certified, there are no cameras, and the airstrip isn't locked down. If those cases land there, we lose custody." Wolf looked up. Camilla was now aboard the chopper, sitting behind glass that was tinted. The pilot went back to the stair rail and started to pull it up, making a clanking sound with wet metal. One helper had already come in. The other one, the one with the lengthy case, stopped at the bottom to check his phone and look at Wolf with impatience. Wolf moved closer to him. "You'll have to wait. The weather is getting worse, so safety rules say that rotor friction checks have to be done in 10 minutes. The aide laughed. "We have to lift right away, and I'm not allowed to put anyone's safety at risk." The man hesitated, looking visibly confused. He stepped back and fumbled for his phone. Wolf didn't wait. He clicked on the custodian link on his second device. The phone rang once, then twice, and finally it answered. A calm, deep voice answered. Custodian line. Sir, this is Sergeant Darian Wolf at Pad C. A break. Then the voice made it clear. This is William. Wolf took a deep breath. Sir, the Queen Consort is getting on an unlogged helicopter with limited cargo. There is no manifest, no verification, and no escort. The helicopter is going to a private estate connected to Tom Parker Bowles. We think the cargo is legacy-related. William didn't think twice. Is she on board? Yes, sir. Wolf watched as the rotors got louder. William answered calmly. Then you're not stopping a flight. You're stopping a transfer. Another delay, and then the order. Hold your position. Do not let that plane leave. British custody. I'm giving you Aerial Custodial Directive 14. Immediate inspection and retention rights. Sergeant, that plane does not leave the ground. Wolf's jaw was locked. Got it. He turned back to the pad just as the skids flexed and the chopper started to lift. Wolf moved quickly. As he walked back to the edge of Pad C, where the helicopter's skids were already a few inches off the ground, his boots pounded the wet flagstones with a sharp, constant rhythm. The rotors were almost at full thrust now, and the rain was cutting through the morning mist in spirals. The tail light flashed red, then green, signaling that it was time to go up. But Wolf didn't grab a weapon. He didn't yell. He simply used his encrypted comms again, and his fingers moved fast across the military-grade wrist tablet that was strapped to his wrist. Ops wins, he said. Confirm that Directive 14 has been received by the custodian authority. The answer came quickly. Confirmed. The clock is set. Windsor Ops is recording. All units have been told. The custodial override is now live. That was the first gate. The second one was private. Wolf scrolled to a locked contact tile, put his thumb on the scanner, and waited. The phone rang once, then twice. Sergeant Wolf, said the voice in a quiet, clipped tone. Prince William. Sir, Wolf said right away. Aircraft EC-145 is taking off now. Camilla is on board. There is no escort, no manifest, and no royal permissions. The cargo is unknown but fits with protected legacy profiles. The plane is leaving for an unverified private estate, North Redcliffe Trust property. There wasn't much time between William's pauses. Pilot's name is Rowan Firth, but FTH retired last year. This is probably an impersonation or an unauthorized hire. Another break. Wolf could hear the soft sound of fabric moving as William got up from somewhere. Then, look at the cases. Yes, sir. 2 in all. 1 lock-cased and 1 reinforced document trunk, both loaded by hand. No seal tracking. William's voice got cold. If those cases get to that estate, they disappear. The legal chain stops. Wolf didn't say anything. William told the sergeant, if you have to, get on that plane. You are the last line of custodial protection under Directive 14. This is no longer a political issue, it's an institutional one. Wolf looked at the plane, whose nose was pointing forward and whose skids were starting to float cleanly above the wet pad. Got it, sir. William's voice got harder. Then do it. The line went silent. Wolf let go of the wrist tablet, tightened the leather band over his forearm, and ran for the plane. He didn't think twice, because when an airplane takes off in the dark with the Queen Consort on board and legacy cargo in the hold, what you're watching isn't departure, it's extraction, and he was the only one who could stop it. The rotors screeched now. The full-blade arc cut through the rain like a strong wind. The helicopter rose by inches, and the skids scraped the edge of the pad before it was completely clear. The downdraft sent rain flying in furious spirals all over the patio. One assistant was still getting in, holding onto the side rail. The other person sat behind Camilla and held the diplomatic case like it was a lifeline. Wolf didn't take the time to think. He ran, his boots pounding on the wet stone, his coat whipping behind him, and his eyes fixed on the skids as they rose chest-height off the pad. The pilot noticed him. A quick flash of alarm, but the elevator didn't break. The plane started to lean forward. Wolf pushed himself up. His left hand hit the edge of the wide bay. His boots slipped on the slick skid rail, trying to find traction, and then they locked. He used all of his strength to pull himself up, banged one leg against the door's inside lip, and swung inside. The cabin shook. Get him off, the pilot yelled from the cockpit, his voice coming through the headset mic loud and clear. He's not allowed. Camilla turned around in her seat. Wolf landed in a deep squat near the cargo deck. He was wet and breathing normally. He stood up in one smooth move, with his boots wide apart for balance. His gloved hand rested softly on the handle of the wall. Her eyes got bigger, not because she was scared, but because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Wolf's voice sounded low, but it was clear above the sound of the rotor. Ma'am, this plane is now being held under Custodial Directive 14. The attendant holding the case pulled back a little. Camilla didn't say anything. Windsor's upper terrace fell away outside the window. The trees below them looked blurry, and the chopper had gotten past the edge, but it was still within the Crown's reach. Not yet. Wolf grabbed for his internal comms and moved the headset panel that was attached to the cargo rail. He pressed the encrypted CrownNet override with his thumb. Sergeant Wolf here from Windsor Ops. Directive 14 is in effect. I am on EC-145. Unauthorized liftoff confirmed. Piloting is Rogue. Confirm command response. The answer came in just a few seconds. Directive acknowledged. Pilot of EC-145, if this is Windsor Control, you are carrying a detained subject and an undeclared cargo that is currently under active custodial review. Return to Windsor right away, or your aircraft will lose its diplomatic immunity. There was no answer from the cockpit. Wolf could see the co-pilot look back at him, and then at the small warning light that was now flashing amber above the altimeter. Camilla still hadn't spoken anything, but her quiet didn't have any force anymore. It was coming apart, the kind that starts when the plane's control no longer rises. It descends with the truth that caught up to it in the air. The helicopter leveled off at a height of less than 2,000 feet. Below them, the patchwork of Windsor's outside grounds gave way to tree lines covered in fog and farms in the distance that were hard to see because of the rain. The cockpit was quiet, too silent. There was no talking or demands for clearance, just the soft glow of dashboard instruments and the subtle hum of authority being tested. Sergeant Wolf moved forward, planting his boots on the floor grid and making his shoulders square. Slowly, Camilla turned in her seat. The hood of her storm cloak has slid down, her hair stuck softly to her cheeks, which were wet from condensation, but her back stayed straight. Her voice was calm. Do you know what you're doing? Wolf didn't move. Yes, Your Majesty. I'm keeping safe what the late Queen told us to. She looked at him. You've gotten on a royal plane without permission, stopped a consort's trip, and publicly detained someone in front of my staff. He nodded once. I've followed the rules of the crown. She turned her head. You did what William told you to do. Wolf kept his voice steady. He's not giving orders, he's enforcing the law. Finally, the pilot's voice came through, tense and short. Ma'am, we're being followed. There's another plane at our altitude with a military signature. They're not hailing us, they're just following our course. Wolf moved closer to the cockpit wall, putting one hand on the frame to steady himself. He leaned for the switch for the open mic. Confirm that EC-145 is being followed by Windsor Command. Confirmed was the answer. Sergeant, the vehicle that is intercepting is holding visual lock at 1.9. Call sign Crown Bird 2. There are no weapons and no deviation. We are standing by for confirmation of return. Camilla's face grew rigid. Sergeant Wolf, you are staging a mutiny. He looked her in the eye. No, ma'am. I'm stopping a transfer. You left with legacy cargo, skipped manifest verification, and used a fake pilot ID to fly to a private estate connected to your son. That's not mutiny. It's interdiction. She turned her head. You'll lose your job for this. He answered right away. Then I'll lose it doing what I promised to do. He punched the comm again, sending a message to the plane's command. This is Sergeant Wolf. The custodian's permission has been confirmed. Directive 14 is still in effect. The pilot must return to Windsor right away, or be considered in violation of airspace immunity. The co-pilot spun around in his chair. Now lower your voice. Captain, we've been flagged. That CrownNet code is real. If we go further into uncontrolled airspace while being held, we lose our sovereign immunity. They could ground us when we get there, and maybe even hold us. The pilot's jaw tightened. His hand was over the throttle. Camilla didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The hush around her had turned from power to isolation, the illusion of control falling apart when things get tough. Then the chopper slowly and purposefully banked to the west. It was still raining in Windsor, but it was waiting. The heavens had just given her back. There was no conversation from the cockpit throughout the quick and steep return vector. The plane quietly coordinated its descent, banking tightly over the rain-soaked rooftops of Windsor's surrounding estate. The second plane, a Royal Intercept chopper, flew steadily off their left wing like a subtle reminder that they were still monitoring. No one said anything inside the cabin. The attendant carrying the diplomatic case had turned pale, and his knuckles were white on the handle. Camilla sat still, with her back straight and her lips firm. The Queen Consort may have been angry, but she kept it hidden behind layers of disciplined reserve. But Wolf could feel the shame in the silence, like smoke curling around him. The skids impacted the damp stone with a loud thud. They had gone back to lower pad B, which was the inspection pad. There was no ceremony, no shaded patio, just the open sky and a line of black uniformed heritage security trucks waiting to form a semicircle. Wolf unhooked the bay handle and fell to the pad just as the co-pilot turned off the rotors. Rain fell sideways, wind channeled down between the bays where maintenance was done. His boots hit the concrete in a steady way. The door to the cabin opened. Slowly, Camilla stepped out. Same scarf, same cloak, but something had changed in her face. It wasn't defeat or terror. It was the cold, calculating look of a chess player who had gone too far in their game. She didn't say anything or look at Wolf. Prince William was already there. He got out of a matte black car with no crown emblem and only a rain-slick field coat. His collar was turned up against the breeze, and his hands were bare. He walked toward the plane alone, without an entourage or an umbrella, with the silent weight of dominance. Wolf took a step back and stood up straight. William walked up to the edge of the pad and stared at Camilla. The wind pushed his coat open a little, but he didn't move. He remarked in a calm voice, "There are easier ways to ask to be taken off the custodial index." Camilla didn't say anything. William didn't push her. Instead, he looked at Wolf. "Ryun, where are the cases?" Wolf pointed to the attendant, who was still inside the cabin with both trunks. "Take them down," William ordered. Wolf went forward and held out his hand. It wasn't strong, but it was firm. The aide looked at Camilla once. She nodded just a little. The cases were given up. William didn't look back as they were taken to the archive escort van, which was waiting beyond the barricade. He just said, "Let's see what was supposed to go away." It wasn't far to the inspection bay. It was just across the eastern entrance lane, between two archive vehicles with their back doors open and two Heritage Protocol officers already there. Wolf strolled next to them as the rain fell in sluggish, misty flakes. The trunks were rolled inside the covered hangar. The mood changed within. Lighting that is clean and climate control. No stone, no show. Just procedure. The first case proceeded first. Black matte finish with brass-reinforced corners. Half-scuffed crown seal near the edge. Wolf typed the override code into the digital lock. The lock opened with a hydraulic click. He raised the lid. Inside were two thin paper folders wrapped in velvet, and a leather folio with the Royal Cipher ER2 stamped on them. The pages within were yellowed, but they were sealed in acetate, which shows that they had been preserved from previous archival work. One of the Heritage officers leaned in and said, "That's royal correspondence." Wolf looked at the top of the letter. Handwritten letter between the late Queen and a Commonwealth leader during a time of constitutional instability. Still secret, still part of the royal record wings, an archive that can't be exported. This wasn't a souvenir. This was powder for diplomacy. He closed the folio again and opened the second trunk. This one had a padded file box with nicely placed files and hand-typed labels. At the top, drafts for fundamental transfers and the merging of family trusts. The pages were legal papers, drafts, suggestions, and none signed, but they all talked about turning Crown Line charitable properties into a new private company called Parker Heritage Holdings. The purpose was clear: to take some Queen-approved projects, such elderly homes, education centers, and memorial gardens, out of Crown management and put them in a trust structure owned by Camilla's family. Wolf didn't say anything. He went on to the third and last case. It housed one envelope that was heavier, cushioned, and sealed with wax, and the crest of Clarence House. A handwritten label in dark ink said, "TPB Holdings, Estate Registry Drafts." He opened it slowly. There was a pile of land valuation maps, stewardship claims, and internal routing forecasts inside. A few rural titles were linked to old farmlands that Queen Elizabeth's private estate used to own. These lands have not yet been publicly transferred and are still under evaluation by dormant custodians. The whole envelope was a plan, not for escape, but for extraction. William went into the inspection bay behind him. He didn't say anything immediately away. He just strolled over to Wolf and glanced into the last case. Wolf stood up tall. "None of these things were allowed, sir. There was no manifest, no legal handover, and no collection trust notifications. She was leaving with crown-bound materials on a private plane to a holding estate that had been flagged twice before." William nodded once. He added, "She wasn't going to leave the country. She was leaving the school." Wolf shut the last case again and put a red custodial lockout tag over the latches to show that it could only be reviewed by certain people and kept private. One of the officials in charge of Heritage walked forward. "Sir, orders?" William answered right away. "Give all three to the Royal Collection Trust. There will be an immediate embargo, no release, inspection, or legal access without a formal custodian override." He turned to Wolf. "Do you have permission to travel?" Wolf answered quickly, "Suspended, starting right now." William took a deep breath and then walked away. Wolf stood still as the carts went away, taking with them not only cargo, but also the failure of a scheme that had almost worked. Almost. The rain had stopped, but it was still enough to make the helipad look shiny. A faint morning light pushed through the clouds, low and subdued, as if the sky itself had calmed down. The helicopter was still now, with the engine off, the rotor blades still, and the body covered in mist. The plane that had tried to sneak away without being seen suddenly seemed exposed, like a secret that didn't stay concealed. Sergeant Darian Wolf stayed close by, with his helmet under one arm and his stance still perfect. He didn't look happy. He didn't have to. Some missions didn't want to win. They just wanted to stop. He had done just that. He heard footsteps behind him that were slow and steady. Prince William walked up by himself, with his gloves in one pocket and rain still dripping off his coat. No one else followed, not even the journalists or the police. It was just the future king, and the guy who had kept a helicopter in the air with nothing but procedure and principle. William halted and walked away, his eyes on the plane on the ground. He said, "You jumped into a helicopter today." Sergeant Wolfe's answer was simple. "It was leaving with things that weren't hers, sir." William nodded once, a small but important sign. And now they aren't. They stood there for a little while longer. There were no words, but something unspoken passed between them, an understanding of the burden they both had to bear, and the need to do what needed to be done, not for attention or reward, but for the sake of something bigger than either of them. The 3 archival cases slipped into the waiting vans behind them. The rain made the red seals look shiny. The caravan went down the hill and into the sealed annex deep within Windsor's stone flank, where the crown kept the pieces of itself that were too valuable to show off. William turned around and left. "Sergeant, get some sleep." Wolfe didn't say anything. He just remained there and watched the vehicles disappear into the fog. No honors, no headlines, just stillness coming back to the pad, and a heritage went back to where it belonged. Not by fighting, but through a man who wouldn't let it disappear behind tinted glass and fake clearance. Sometimes, protecting the crown didn't mean stopping attacks against it. It meant catching it when it tried to get away from itself. Sergeant Darian Wolfe stood alone on the helipad, his helmet under one arm, stance still perfect. He didn't look happy. He didn't have to. Some missions didn't want to win. They just wanted to stop. He had done just that. The rain had eased but left the ground slick, the rotor blades still, the helicopter silent, exposed like a secret that couldn't hide. Wolfe's eyes scanned the area once more, then rested on the archived cases, now secured and out of reach. The crown's legacy was safe, if only for the moment. A calm settled over the terrace, only broken by distant bird calls and the soft drip of leftover rain. Wolfe breathed deeply, letting the tension leave his body. The quiet was not victory, it was responsibility, a duty executed properly, without fanfare, without recognition, but perfectly within the rules of law and crown procedure. He glanced at the horizon, where the morning light barely cut through the clouds, and nodded to himself. He had done what was needed. The crown remained whole, the legacy preserved, and the helicopter grounded until proper authorization was secured. Prince William's words echoed softly in his mind. "Sergeant, get some sleep." Wolfe allowed himself a small nod, his mission complete for now. He watched as Windsor returned to its usual rhythms, the rain stopping, the mist settling, the world unaware of how close the crown had come to losing what it couldn't afford to lose. He stood tall, alone but vigilant, a sentinel, who had caught the crown when it tried to get away.